Alright, so with how popular Infernoble Simple Spoils is becoming, I think we need to talk about how to beat it. There's a bunch of new combos and interesting build that just hopped and all of that, so we need to talk about how to counter this deck and where the best point of interaction is. If you have any of your own thoughts, preferably if you're playing Infernoble and you feel like you want to share your secrets, you can let us know where the choke points of the deck are so all of us can actually beat this deck. And if you enjoy me doing these types of videos, make sure to give the video a like as well. So I guess to start things off, the first thing I want to say is it's a little bit tricky to actually counter the deck because it just does so much. It searches a bunch and there's no particular point where you would want to Ash and feel really good about yourself, because then they have like 3 different spell cards that pretty much search the exact same thing and then you kind of just hand looped yourself. So it's kind of weird in that regard. That's one thing. Another thing is that, you know, their board is like, they put up a bunch of disruption. So sometimes the best course of action would be to pair up 2 things. If you have Nibiru plus Impermanence, that's like probably the best thing, and you can actually beat the board that way. And with everything else we're going to be discussing today, you're kind of just betting on them not having follow-up and extenders, which is not always going to happen because they have a bunch of extenders. So I know this is a little bit of a sad start to the video, but it's just the reality of things. So I guess we can try our best and try to counter the deck as best as we can. So pretty much the number 1 course of action would be to throw everything that you have at Neospace Connector, because it doesn't give you any choice. Like, you kind of just have to deal with it if you don't want to give your opponent the hand knowledge and if you don't want them to actually, you know, rip a card out of your hand. So basically, as much as it is painful, you kind of have to Imperm, Veiler, Ash, do pretty much anything to the Neospace Connector because it just pretty much leaves you no choice. So there is that. The next, I guess, point of interaction would be Isolde, and it's also really tricky when it comes to her. And why that is because if you have targeting negation, for example, and we actually saw that in the feature match, which is a great example. So the opponent had Mourner, if I'm not mistaken, but it works just the same with Veiler and Impermanence as well. If you have targeting negation and you're trying to negate the actual card and leaving them 0 advantage, then you would use it on the first effect, because then they don't have follow-up, and they also won't be able to actually successfully resolve the second effect. They can only send the cost. However, if you're a little more cautious, you can wait for the second effect, because with an extender, they can just easily make a new Isolde, and then again, you didn't do anything. And another thing to keep in mind is if they don't have a way of, you know, extending or doing whatever and actually resolving the second effect, if you actually negate it and they just decide to send the cost, their equip spells are going to do a lot in the graveyard. They can pretty much do, like, they can add it back with the Renault. They will usually add back DDR, so they have additional plays. And then with the Phoenix Blade, they can just pretty much banish anything, bring it back with DDR, and it's just like the Isolde summon hurts if it doesn't get to summon, but you still have your equip spells in the grave to play with them, and there are no more bricks in the deck. So it's weird. It's very weird, but that's it when it comes to targeting negation. Those would probably be the best points, unless you're trying to pair things up. There might be some other better points, like you can share your thoughts if you want, but pretty much my call is always to just, you know, deal with Isolde as best as I can. And usually I will give them the search and then actually negate the second effect, so I'm not afraid of them making a second one. Another card that's really impactful against them is Shifter, because they have all of the resources that we just talked about in the graveyard, not to mention that they have like a gazillion monsters that just become equip spells just because. So all of them, or pretty much most of them, can get equipped from the graveyard. There's also the Turpin special summon, because it can be special summoned either from the hand or the graveyard. Then there's the Ricciardetto, which pretty much, you know, deals with the graveyard. It has to banish itself from there to summon. So all of your resources are there, and Shifter is just a pain for this deck. So at least there's that. At least we have Shifter. And moving on to another quite hated, annoying card, it's Droll. Like I said, they have a bunch of spells, a bunch of extenders, and all they do is search pretty much. And, you know, just for fun, their Fuse spell just searches a lot because it's not once per turn, because they just decided that it's not going to be once per turn, and that's great. And all of their like equip spell cards are able to get to new cards, and pretty much even if you're only stopping like the Isolde follow-up, you've still done something, because this deck actually shines with all of the follow-up that it creates for itself. So if the board gets broken, they still have cards to play with. And if you turn off their searches, I think you're going to achieve quite a lot. Another card that always, or almost always, has impact is Nibiru. But it's again going to be just a little bit awkward as to when you're going to actually use the card. And what I'm mainly talking about is two things. They can either go for the Girfried or the Baron early. Now, I am not that familiar with the combos to say 100%, they can summon under 5 times and actually put a negate on the board. If you know of those combos, please share them in the comments. But pretty much like if you have Nibiru, maybe you want to wait and pair it up so you know for a fact you actually get the effect off. And if they don't make the negate early, then you're going to be able to deal with their board. But again, you have to think about extenders. It is going to be a little bit easier if your Nibiru actually goes through because they only have the token, since Renault and some other cards need to have specific attributes and types on the field. So there is that, at least that. But still, they have quite a lot of extenders, and they can special summon themselves. For example, the Girfried can pretty much just get rid of an equip spell and special summon itself. So it's much easier to actually put monsters on the board and play through Disruption for this deck. So yeah, like I keep saying, it is not ideal, but we are going to try our best. There's a couple niche cards. I wanted to talk about DD Crow mainly because it's like quite present in the meta. It is nice against Pearly and pretty much against everything else that Bestios would be good against, and Pearly is like the only deck that Bestios wouldn't do anything against. So we play DD Crow, and DD Crow is nice. I already mentioned the Ricciardetto, which will have to, banish itself to perform an effect, so you can deal with that, or the Turpin, or the Charos, which is a great point of interaction, because if you actually chain DD Crow when their link targets the Synchro Charos, even though the card is still physically like the same card, the link will have no way of actually confirming its name and everything else that has to do with the Charos upon resolution. So DD Crowing the Charos is perfect in that situation. Or maybe if you have like multiples of it, or like multiples of just different hand traps, you can just deal with like a random monster in the graveyard that would later become a really annoying equip spell. So there is that. You need to think about, when it comes to Angelica, like Angelica is always going to trigger when it gets targeted. So even if you target it, make sure to just keep that in mind. It's just going to banish itself and give the deck quite a lot of advantage, actually. Like the card is really, really good. So sometimes what you maybe would want to do is deal with the tuner on the field, which is much easier said than done, but you just need to be aware of them making Angelica quite easily. And Renault actually becomes a tuner when it special summons itself via its own effect. So yeah, it's not just the Ricciardetto, you actually have to deal with all of them. So there is that. There's another card, it's Ghost Bell. It's kind of like extremely niche, but they do summon, and I keep mentioning the same cards. You have the Turpin and like again the Ricciardetto, but there is not a lot of people running Ghost Bell right now, so I guess that's just worth mentioning if you happen to find yourself running this card. And I guess that's it when it comes to hand traps. You pretty much have to hope that they don't have extenders, or that you have a card that's as impactful as Shifter and Draw are. And moving on to going second cards, which actually might prove themselves a little bit more useful in some instances. For example, you have a couple blowout cards that just deal with the entire field, and that's ideal when it comes to combo decks with a lot of monster presence. However, of course there is a however in this entire situation. The Angelica's Ring is this insane equip spell, which just boosts the deck even further. And it's very, very similar to the Mermail Atlantean spell that deck always played. It just reminds me of that spell. Pretty much negates the first spell effect, and it can actually negate stuff like Super Poly, that's like spell speed 4 or however you want to call it, because it like doesn't chain to it, it just flat out negates it. So any kind of blowout card you have, which usually come in the form of spell cards, that card just deals with them by itself. So then you need to think about like having hand traps and then also having spell cards, just because you're going to be able to bait the spell maybe with like a piece of engine if you don't really need it, and then you actually play the blowout card, which would be Dark Ruler. Again, dealing with the entire field is really nice. Or Droplet maybe if you want to deal with specific stuff, and if you maybe have multiple ways of getting rid of the monsters, because you actually have ways of, you know, removing them via Lava Golem, Kaijus, or Sphere mode. They are ending on quite a lot of monsters, so all of those are going to come in handy if your deck can actually run them. And there's also Super Polymerization. So Super Poly is nice. You have multiple different targets, and it's going to depend on their end board, but Super Poly is going to be quite a useful card moving forward, not just against Infernoble, but it is going to be strong. So there is that. And when it comes to going first cards, since the deck is monotype, there can be, is of course going to be really, really useful. And since it's a combo deck and it just summons a bunch, Summon Limit is also going to come in handy. Those would be like the two most prominent cards right now, because like there can be run by Vanquish Soul and some other decks in the meta, and Summon Limit is like pretty much just tied together with Purley, and the deck can definitely run it. So those two cards would be useful, and like Skill Drain and just stuff that usually hurt combo decks and just decks in general. So those would be like the going first cards that are nice, and I pretty much think that's it. Like, it's a little bit awkward. Try to throw everything that you have at Neospace Connector, because you have to. Stop Isolde because it gives them much more, but the equip spells are still a little bit annoying. Think about the tuners, and I don't know, hope that you can Nibiru them, or that you can play a deck that runs Shifter. That's pretty much all I have for you. And hopefully this video was, you know, informative, and hopefully you got something from it. If you have more of your own thoughts and ideas about cards that we have to be running to beat this deck, make sure to share them in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.